As the rover makes their way through the world of Wuthering Waves in search of their lost memories, they meet all manner of people, each with their own agendas, plans, and levels of crazy. While there are lone wolves, many of these people tend to belong to specific groups. You have the good guys, the bad guys, and then you have the bad shit insane. So in this video, we are going to discuss all the currently known groups or factions that exist within the game and determine what each of their main goals might be. Before we do that though, if you want to see any Wuthering Waves, Honkai Star Rail, or Genshin Impact lore content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Now because I'm going to be talking about characters and factions that might appear only later in the story, this video is going to have spoilers. So if you want to avoid those, I'd suggest coming back later once you've completed the entire main story. If you don't particularly care about that, then we can continue on with each of the factions, starting off with the very first one we meet, Jinzhou. As far as the lore is concerned, Jinzhou is just the name of the first city we visit, but because there are so many characters from here, I'm just going to consider them a faction all their own. Given Jinzhou is one of the 6 cities found in the nation of Huanglong, there are many sub-factions that exist under its name. Many of these subgroups are those that you would typically find running a nation, such as research groups, military personnel, and even trade officials. For example, Yang Yang, who we meet early on, is part of the Midnight Rangers, the military body of Jinzhou, while Bai Zi is from Huashu Academy, the research arm of the city. In the context of the story, those that come from Jinzhou are the proverbial good guys, who try and help the main character search for their lost memories. By the end of the story, the main character ends up returning the favor by repelling the Tacet Discord outbreak threatening their city. The faction is led by their magistrate, Jinzi, who leads the city alongside their guardian Oracle Engine and sentinel, Jue. We'll talk about the sentinels a bit later in the video. Now, what exactly is the main goal of this group within the context of the main story? While they focus most of their time and efforts in protecting their nation and its people from the Tacet discords, they seem to also be actively fighting against another faction, the Fraxus. The reason they oppose them is that the Fraxus often disregard other human lives in pursuit of their own goals and have in the past caused a lot of death and damage to Jinzhou while trying to implement their plans. I'll talk about the Fraxus a bit later in the video and you'll understand why Jinzhou opposes them. All in all, the people of Jinzhou likely focus most of their efforts in maintaining their current way of life and surviving through the post-apocalyptic world of Solaris 3, but at the same time, they are also likely actively trying to help the rover in finding out who they are and preventing the Fraxus from achieving their ultimate goals. If we can consider a nation and its inhabitants as their very own faction, then it's worth noting that there are actually a few others on Solaris 3. Outside of Huanglong, the planet of Solaris 3 actually plays host to an additional 5 other nations, but as of now, only one other nation has been named, the New Federation. This country or faction or whatever you want to call it is where both Verina and Calcharo are said to have originated from. Since we haven't really heard much about the other nations, I can't really speak too much about them and what their goals might be. In the future, they might function like the nations in Genshin Impact if you're familiar with that comparison, with each of them being a faction all their own with their own problems and agendas. Now within each of these nations are the enigmatic group referred to as the Sentinels. I'm not entirely sure if the Sentinels can even be categorized as a faction, as it's unclear whether their allegiance is to humanity as a whole or to the nation they claim to protect. Even within the Huanglong nation, there is one capital and 6 cities, each with its own sentinel. So it's likely that the sentinels would protect Huanglong collectively, though there isn't anything really that confirms this. Plus, I'm not even sure if it functions the same in other nations. I know it's a little frustrating that a video about factions has so much uncertainty on what is even considered as a faction, but these are still early days and a lot of these details are just not fully expanded on at the moment. Anyways, of the little we know, the Sentinels are said to be immortal beings who have always been around supporting the humans. They stand at the precipice of human civilizations and act as guardians, advisors, and record keepers. They have helped humanity survive through many hardships and disasters, and with the rise of the Lament and Wave-worn phenomena, their presence is an important beacon to humanity. The only sentinel we currently know of is Jue, who takes on the appearance of Kaido. I mean, it's an Eastern dragon with dark and azure scales. The Sentinel of Jinzhou, Jue, is said to have the ability to see the future, though since Sentinels are referred to as Oracle Engines, it might not be unique to Jue alone. Again, very little is known about them and how they might function as a group, but given their penchant for babysitting humanity, it's probably a safe bet to assume they are on the side of good, at least for now, and only wish to ensure humanity continues. With some of the good guy factions out of the way, let's now talk about some of the more evil looking factions, starting with the Tacet discords. Now, I've done a video explaining everything there is to know about the Tacet discords, but a summarized version is that they are manifestations of the chaotic frequencies that exist within the world of Solaris 3. These frequencies are thought to amalgamate into sentient creatures and sometimes even mutate existing ones into terrifying monsters. They are driven by an instinct to consume the frequencies of others in an attempt to stabilize their forms as well as to evolve. Suffice to say, the TDs are basically the monsters and enemies we encounter in the overworld of the game. On the surface, if you've seen the many types of TDs in the game world, you might wonder how could these things even be considered a faction? They are disorganized, appear different from one another, and often even fight amongst themselves. Well, in their natural habitat, this does seem like the case. But you see, when the bigger, badder TDs appear or when another faction manipulates them, then these things suddenly get super organized super quick. One great example of this was when Overthrax the Trinodian returned to the setting during the main story. The TDs almost overwhelmed the city of Jinzhou despite Overthrax not yet even reaching its full power, and most of Jinzhou had already been preparing for the attack. So if left to their own devices, the TDs don't seem to have the interest or the will to work together, but once a boss monster appears, then things get real bad real quick. It kind of reminds me of the orcs in Warhammer 40k when a war boss or a Krork appears. Now, we don't really know who the Trinodians even report to, but it's undeniable that when both Trinodians and TDs appear together, they form a formidable enough group all their own, capable of severely threatening the remnants of humanity. As for what their true intentions are, it's really anybody's guess, but given the Trinodians wish to only feed on the collapsed will of humanity, while the TDs only look to feed on leftover frequencies, it's likely whatever they are doing is purely to satiate their hunger. Unless of course another faction might be manipulating them, but who would be crazy enough to do that? Well, let me introduce you to my current favorite of all these factions, the craziest of the bunch, the Fraxus. Little is known about this faction, though their membership seems to include some rather unhinged individuals. While we are unaware of their organizational structure, there are said to be two rankings as of now, the Artificers and the Overseers. The Artificers are the rank and file members, while the Overseers are functionally their leaders. When first introduced, the Fraxus came alongside a little story that lightly hinted at their past. The story goes a little like this. In an undisclosed place and at an undetermined amount of time ago, there was once a village. One day, an outsider came to the village and promised them gifts and granted wishes. This outsider was also referred to as the shepherd. While it seemed like a pretty sweet deal at first, each gift or wish came at the expense of another villager other than the one who made the request, but most of them were unaware of this at first. While each villager essentially continued to make wishes at the expense of someone else, a lone villager would eventually realize the price they had to pay for these wishes. The villagers though would not part with this gift or betray the outsider, and the lone villager was labeled as a black sheep and ostracized. It's implied that the members of the Fraxus are in fact the black sheeps mentioned in this story, an allegory for those who have realized the price they pay for wishes granted by the outsider. While the entire story could be an outright lie or perhaps embellished in some way, the fact that the two Fraxus members we actually meet appear to have scars and bandages all over their bodies might imply that there is some truth to this story. Now, what exactly is their main goal? Essentially, the members of the Fraxus aim to bring about the next lament, one they refer to as the true lament, by resurrecting the Trinodians. While it might seem like they are doing this to perhaps bring about the end of the world or something, it's very likely that it's more related to their core beliefs. You see, the Fraxus believe that in order to accelerate and attain the next level of human evolution, each person must absorb Tacet discords into themselves. Currently, this is done through the use of the Pangu terminal, with the main character or rover the only person able to absorb it into their bodies with no ill effects. This rather unique trait of the main character is also why the Fraxidus wish to recruit the rover into their ranks. So my guess is that instead of bringing about the lament, they also want to resurrect Trinodians so they themselves may absorb them and transcend to the next stage of evolution. Since we don't know who the outsider in their little story is and why they want to ascend, I'm gonna make a rather wild guess. I think that they want to absorb Trinodians so that they may become strong enough to get revenge on the outsiders or shepherds that essentially screwed each of them up. On the other hand, perhaps the shepherd in the story was a Trinodian, and the very first Fraxidus gained untold powers when they absorbed them. But all of that is just a guess and is unsubstantiated in any way. Let's move on to the last faction on this list, the Black Shores. The Black Shores are a secretive organization that claims that their only goals is to work towards the salvation of the world itself. Everything about them is a secret, from their membership, total members, main base location, and even their recruitment process. But then you might be wondering, if they are truly secretive, why do we know their goals? Well, despite having a reputation for being secretive, they seem to be pretty front and center in the world's activities. First off, the group seems to have an official logo, that of the Blake Bloom flower, which itself is rather unique and thus easily identifiable. Each member also seems to proudly showcase this symbol somewhere on their person at all times. In fact, some of them just have the flower itself pinned on their clothes outright. So you can kind of see how unsecretive this secretive group is. To their credit though, the membership requirements and tests are kept pretty secretive, and those that wish to enter their ranks have been evaluated long before they even realize it. As I've mentioned, their goals are nothing short of the world's salvation, though what this exactly entails is unclear. Given the world is being decimated by the lament, it's likely they wish to put an end to all the lament-related natural disasters occurring on Solaris 3. Because of this, I have this weird suspicion that most of its members are actually scientists and field researchers. Of the 3 that we've met, 2 of them referred to themselves as consultants, namely Alto and Encore. So perhaps these consultants conduct field research and collect data, while the other members carry out lab-based research. The third member, Camellia, seems like a better fit for the Fraxidus given she clearly has a few screws loose, but who knows, she might be a pretty capable and intelligent person. The reason why I think they might mostly be scientists and researchers is because the organization are said to have developed a lament prediction system and actually have partnerships with many different nations. This allows them to set up resonance beacons to monitor the lament and likely how they collect data on it, and it probably acts like an early warning system. Plus, when we followed Alto and Encore in the main story, they mostly went to an abandoned research base to gather information. So my guess is that they're just a bunch of scientists hoping to reverse the calamities that have occurred on the planet of Solaris 3. A really interesting twist would be if they were the ones to cause it through some unethical experiments and are now just trying to correct their mistakes, but who really knows? Also, just to be clear, the Black Shores don't seem good or evil either way and are likely neutral as far as alignments are concerned. And that's pretty much all the main factions we've met so far in the story. Now, I am aware that there are other historical and smaller groups I didn't bring up here, like the Court of Savante and the Midnight Rangers, but each of those functionally either don't exist anymore or serve one of the larger factions such as Jinzhou. If more about them is expanded on, I'll be sure to make individual updates on them in the future. That's about it for this video. Let me know in the comments which faction is the one you're most interested in at the moment and which one seems like the most boring. If you enjoyed watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.